Recording has started.
All right. Welcome, everyone, to tonight's special meeting of the Santa Monica Housing Commission. Before we begin, I want to remind you that this meeting is simultaneously being translated into Spanish. So anyone interested in hearing the meeting in Spanish needs to log into the Spanish channel via the drop-down bar in the top left part of your screen. If you have any questions, you can put them in the chat, and staff Agnieszka Pierce will be able to help you. And with that, I hereby call to order the September 15th, 2022 special meeting of the Housing Commission. Before we get started, Agnieszka, would you please call roll?
Yes.
Thank you.
Chair Gray.
Here.
Vice Chair Marasco.
Here.
Commissioner Borison.
Yes, here.
Commissioner Everts. Commissioner Gomez.
Here.
Commissioner Hamilton. And Commissioner Hilton.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, I'm delighted to welcome our guest of honor, HUD Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary Dimitri McCain, and special guests Douglas Rice, Special Policy Advisor in the Office of Public and Indian Housing, Kenneth Carroll, Regional Director of the Office of Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity, and Mina Bavin, Director of Public Housing in the Los Angeles Field Office. And now Vice Chair Teresa Marasco will tell us some more about our guest of honor. Teresa, I think you're muted.
So sorry. Good evening, Peter S. McCain, and everyone who is joining us this evening for this very special meeting. Peter S. McCain has a long career in fair housing and civil rights as an attorney and has had many successes in creating housing equity for all. Peter S. McCain joined HUD following 15 years of service, with 5 years as president at the Inclusive Communities Project, or ICP, a Dallas, Texas-based affordable fair housing nonprofit. Prior to becoming president, she oversaw operations, communications, and ICP's Mobility Assistance Program, a housing mobility program that helps housing choice voucher holders exercise their fair housing rights. Conceived by PDS McCain's ICP's Voices for Opportunity initiative has provided advocacy training to low-income renters and neighborhood groups of color. Before joining ICP, PDS McCain worked on USDA Section 515 Rural Multifamily Housing Matters and at the National Housing Law. She was also a staff attorney for the Neighborhood Legal Services Program of Washington, D.C., assigned to the Southeast office where her portfolio primarily included landlord-tenant matters for low-income renters in private and public housing. She has taught as an adjunct instructor of fair housing and homelessness course to undergraduate Coppin State University students. PDS McCain brings dual vantage points to FHEO after having spent years assisting both housing choice voucher holders who sought low poverty, well-resourced housing options, and neighborhood groups in underserved communities of color who sought more equitable distribution of resources and services. She is a graduate of Howard University School of Law, New York University and Brooklyn College, and a member of the Dallas alumni chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority, Inc. Of special interest to me is PDS McCain's work with the Inclusive Communities Project Mobility Assistance Program, where she helped more than 4,000 families move to low poverty communities or high opportunity neighborhoods with greater resources such as full service grocery stores, healthcare facilities, well-resourced schools, and access to living wage jobs. So we welcome you, Petus McCain, to the City of Santa Monica's Housing Commission meeting. We are honored and pleased to have you here tonight.
Well,
Thank
thank you much. I'm not sure if the chair wanted to speak first, or just let me know how you'd
Please,
like to proceed.
yes, we're still in a formal meeting. We only have one item on the agenda, but we will be moving now to the special agenda item, moderated Q&A and listening session with special guest Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary at the Office of Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity, Demetria McCain, on affirmatively furthering fair and affordable housing in Santa Monica. I just wanted to let the public know that we will be receiving public comments on this item after the Q&A session. And with that, yes, welcome, Petus McCain.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me okay. Sorry I'm not there with you in person, but this is just as good. This is just as good. And thank you for introducing my colleagues because they're going to help me along here. I'll open up with some remarks. And my colleague, Ken Carroll, who actually is there in California, provide more of a local perspective, you might say. And then my colleague, Doug Rice, who really kind of focuses on at headquarters, the program. He brought his with him as well. So actually, I brought a team for you guys, not just me. So let's kind of start with, we received some questions in advance, and my comments are going to try to be responsive of those to the extent that I can. I certainly can't answer everything in level of detail that perhaps the questions were posed, but I'll certainly do my best. So let's get started.
Sure.
So let me start by just level setting. Is there a question?
Oh, no, I was just going to ask if you would please define fair housing for us and explain what.
Well, yeah, let me just, I received some, go through that, and then we'll go from there.
I'm sorry, you broke up a bit. Could you repeat that, please?
Sure, maybe I should put some headphones in. Hang on 2 seconds.
Okay.
Okay, perhaps you can hear me better now?
Yes, thank you.
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay, certainly.
So I was planning on asking you questions just to help frame it for everybody. And if you could answer with whatever you feel you can address. Would that work?
Sure, I could do that. I could do that, but I might go ahead and maybe start out in the notes that I have some of those framing questions, if that works for you, Madam Chair.
Sure, whatever you like.
All right, sure. All right, so I'm going to start out with what the mission of the Office of Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity is. So, and I'll refer to it as FHEO for short. So the mission of our particular office, which is within HUD, is to eliminate housing discrimination, promote economic opportunity, and achieve diverse, inclusive communities by leading the nation in enforcement, administration, and the public understanding, what we're doing here, right, of federal fair laws. And we do that using several authorities. We strictly stick to the authorities that we have, and we can't go outside of those authorities. But our authorities include several statutes, including the Fair Housing Act, of course, of 1968, as it has been since amended, as well as Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, entities that are federally funded and just race and national origin. Also, Section 109 of the Housing and Development Act of 74 is one of our authorities. Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, 3 of the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, as well as the Architectural Barriers Act of 1968, the Age Discrimination Act of 1975, Title 9 of the Education Amendments of 72. So people quite often just think about the Fair Housing Act itself, but we have several authorities. And so with those authorities, our activities include investigating fair housing complaints, conducting complaints reviews, ensuring civil rights in HUD programs, as well as managing fair housing grants that we give to certain nonprofits who qualify through our grant program, actually. And our office is organized. We have 10 regional offices across the country. Your particular region, which is in the state of California, falls in what's called Region 9. So folks might want to kind of make a note of that you guys are in Region 9 out of all of our regional offices. And so the work that our field offices do, also known as our regional offices, are critical. It's the bulk of our work, actually, because those are the offices that actually take complaints from the public and take a look at those complaints, if they fall under our to investigate them and try to come to some type of resolution, as well as those regional offices support our FIP nonprofit Fair Housing Partners. Our FIP nonprofit housing partners are really crucial. We don't have enough throughout the country, but we do have some, and there are some in California who do some of the work with community to help them kind of frame and shape up and look at some of the fair housing issues that they think may exist. And so individual complaints come to our fair housing offices from people like one-on-one persons, as well as from community groups. And that's really the primary way we are able to get to the issues of discrimination and address them. Now that's the field office. We have the headquarters office, which is where I am, right, in Washington, D.C., obviously. And we really kind of set broad policies, and we undertake some of the more complex investigative matters that our regions take in, but all of those individual complaints are at the regions, although our headquarters could support the staff to go through those types of things. And we also issue grants to the nonprofits that I mentioned that are locally based, while also supporting other regional offices and national effort and particular administration and what have you. And so I mentioned Ken Carroll. He'll be speaking after me. He is a person you'll want to know. Ken is our Region 9 regional director. But also with me, I said I brought some other friends like Doug Rice, who's the special policy advisor for PIH. Now, your housing, it's an interesting one because actually the Fair Housing Act does not define fair housing. You won't find that definition there. But what you will find is the definition of a discriminatory housing practice, right? So in a way, that statute says that a discriminatory housing practice means it is an act that is unlawful under the Fair Housing Act according to sections 3604, 05, 06, and 17. What in the world does that mean? Well, 4 says the discrimination in the sale or rental of housing is a type of prohibited practice. So sale and rental, not just rental, not just sales, but both, right? 3605 says that you can't have discrimination in residential real estate related transactions, right? 3606 says discrimination is illegal in the provision of brokerage services. And 3617 says that it is illegal to interfere or coerce or intimidate someone as they're trying to exercise their housing rights. So, definition of fair housing you're not going to find in the Fair Housing Act, but you will find that definition that I just mentioned, which is what is a discriminatory housing practice. Now, your topic today is affirmatively furthering fair housing, and I'm proud to say that under this administration, last summer of 2021, well, it's already fall now. Is it truly fall? let's just say in mid-2021, this particular administration brought back some of the original definitions from the 2015 Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing Regulation, because it had been rolled back in a way that really was not recognizable in their housing world. And so we are now living on those 2015 definitions. Let me pause right there for a commercial. The commercial is now the Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing Rule is being tweaked, you might say. And the literature
I'm sorry
some
to
changes to the rule.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Demetria. You're cutting in and out quite a bit. I just wanted to let you know there's like a lag, and you're buffering quite a bit.
Okay. So maybe turning off the video would be helpful. That's the interference, perhaps. Let's try it.
Well, I don't know about that.
Or do you want me to try to dial in by, or
no?
Do you want me to dial in by phone?
No, I wasn't going to say that. I just didn't know if you might have some other heavy use on your Wi-Fi at your house that you could. No, okay.
And no one else is home. I'm sorry.
Yeah, just go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Okay. No, okay. Happy to switch over to phone if it's necessary. But we'll power through. Let's see what happens. So okay. The commercial is the commercial is and then is it that bad that you want me to do that? I have no problem doing that.
No, go ahead. Let's keep going.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
So right now we're kind of adjusting that rule, the Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing Rule, and we hope for it to come out for public comment in the very near term. I hope this fall. And so we'd love for stakeholders like yourselves and to take a look at that proposed rule and comment on it, and let us know what you think about some of the changes we've made. So that's just a commercial. So I'm going to go back to the definition of affirmatively furthering fair housing. I think somebody has their mic on because I hear others.
One second, sorry. I'm sorry, please continue.
Okay, sure. And so let's go over to the actual definition of affirmative fair housing, because this really sounds like what you're looking on. To take meaningful actions in addition to combating discrimination is not enough. You've got to take meaningful actions that actually overcome the patterns of segregation and actually foster inclusive communities that are free from barriers that restrict access to opportunity-based characteristics, right? So there's 7 protected classes for folks who don't know. So discrimination against thing is not necessarily falling under the Fair Housing Act. It's the 7 protected classes are race, national origin, color, familial status, sex, including gender identity, sexual preference, as well as disability. Those are the 7 protected classes. I think I hit, and religion, right? And so those are very critical to understand. When we talk about AFFH, affirmatively furthering fair housing, it's about those protected classes. So now specifically, affirmatively furthering fair housing means taking meaningful actions that take together, like in a comprehensive way, you may say, address significant disparity in housing needs and in access to opportunity, right? Replacing segregated living patterns with truly integrated and balanced living patterns, transforming racially or ethnically concentrated areas of poverty into areas of opportunity, while also fostering and maintaining compliance with civil rights and fair housing laws. And so this duty that we're talking about, the duty to affirmatively fair housing, we as HUD have duty, but that duty extends to actually all of the program participants' activities and the programs that relate to housing and urban development. So it includes our grantees who receive funding through, let's say, CDBG funding, which are like cities, counties, and states of certain size, and as well as housing authorities. So that's what affirmatively furthering is all about. Now, also, at the same time, while bringing back those definitions, this administration brought back the certification requirement. What is the certification requirement? And so what that is a grantee has to certify when they are affirmatively furthering fair housing. And so bringing that back under what we call the 2021 interim final rule required program participants to submit certifications that they will affirmatively further fair housing in connection with their consolidated plan, if they get funding from our their annual action plans, as well as their public housing administrative plans. So in order to support these certifications, the interim final rule that I just talked about actually created a voluntary process by which jurisdictions and housing authorities could choose process. So the certification exists no matter what, even though right now the planning process is voluntary. And I think somebody's mic is on. There's somebody else who has their mic on, so that actually sound is not coming from me. So if everybody would mute, that probably would help everyone.
Yeah, I believe everyone is muted except the interpreter and myself and you.
So maybe we've been hacked. All right, it's quiet now, so I'll keep talking.
Okay, thank you.
So let me talk a little bit more about the voluntary process that's taking place. Because right now we're working on revising the rule. Therefore, there's not a mandatory planning process going on. There's a voluntary planning process that's going on. While the voluntary planning process is going on, our office is providing assistance. We call it TA, technical assistants, who are going through that process. And so there's a particular office by follow-up resources for you, like email addresses and what have you. If in fact you know of or you become in jurisdiction that would like to voluntarily go through this planning process right now without waiting for the new rule to come out. But what's really important to understand that the technical assistance we provide is simply general ways of thinking about things and maybe letting you know what other jurisdictions that have gone through and have done and have chosen to do, because the plans that jurisdictions create are very fact driven, and it is not HUD's to actually tell jurisdictions how to address and what to do when they create their AFFH plans. It's very fact driven, it's very local, it should include input from the community. And so that's really important to understand regarding that process. Now, another that was raised was the issue of concentration of poverty. And so concentration of poverty and the impact of concentrated poverty on protected classes. And let me know if I'm speaking too long, because I do have other folks who are going to speak with me. So I don't want to take up too much time. Please keep me cognizant of the time. And so the way communities address concentrated poverty and segregation, again, fact-driven. I said before that HUD doesn't tell local jurisdictions what to do of, federal versus state and local decisions. The time that you might find that HUD has enforced what local jurisdictions should be doing are probably like in the context of voluntary compliance agreements, which we call VCAs. Voluntary compliance agreements are results of investigations and findings that have taken place. And let me cough for a second. And so when a complainant and a respondent in any really situation under our enforcement authorities, our staff always works with both parties to try to see if they can resolve the issued through a voluntary compliance agreement. Those with maybe some local examples there through Region 9, that's pretty much the only place where you'll find that kind of move the needle, so to say, as far as helping folks understand perhaps what they should do to address some of their compliance issues that have been found through the investigative process. Also, I think on the fore here are issues of the voucher program, and my PH colleagues can talk a little further about that. But the way Housing Authority administers the voucher program, and some might say the way the federal government administers this voucher program, can either help or hinder the expansion, or help or hinder segregation or other types of segregation. There's also segregation by means of segregating people who have disabilities. And so certainly the way a voucher program is administered could help or hinder some of those issues. And so those are some of the types of things that jurisdictions and housing authorities would be looking at when they're looking to see whether or not they are proceeding down the road that will affirmatively further fair housing.
Now, I'd like to.
And let me just.
Oh, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Oh, I had a question. As you may know, in our housing authority jurisdiction, we're a voucher-only jurisdiction, and any project-based housing or other affordable housing is done through local nonprofit housing providers. And the model that's generally used here is 100% affordable housing. And I was hoping you could just speak about the model and how it might align or diverge from affirmatively furthering fair housing, and what alternatives there might be to 100% affordable housing as a model. Just how to have any recommendations, or you know, are I'm wondering how that ties into issues of segregation and preventing housing mobility and choice, and increasing stigma and things like that with the 100% affordable building.
Sure. So it's a question that others have had and others have wrestled with, I believe, across the country. Again, as I said, we're not here to actually, tell folks about what's going on with any detail, because everything is very fact driven. Should a jurisdiction be going through the AFFH planning process, then that's where perhaps our technical assistance team could provide some support. And I know my colleague, Doug, who will be coming up next, can probably speak to some of that, some of those issues as it relates to project-based vouchers. But it really depends on the jurisdiction. So it's a matter of looking at the demographics of a particular jurisdiction. Obviously, I've lived in Dallas, as was mentioned in my bio, where there's a lot of segregation. And to the extent that some housing was being, let's say, steered to a particular area that was already concentrated with lots of, let's say, low-income housing or low-income different types of low-income housing programs, right? Then that was an issue, right? So it's fact-driven, it's looking at the demographics. We do have a few front-end compliance kind of tools, you might say, here in our office. It's called Site and Neighborhood Standards, where we actually, and it doesn't get with action the housing authority might do. It can under certain circumstances. And so actually right now we're in compliance issues right now. But Site and Neighborhood Standards is an example of a policy that is used in certain situations. I'm not sure that it's used in your type of situations, but in certain situations where our office actually takes a look at what's going on in a neighborhood as certain types of housing activity are going to take place by way of a housing authority. Not necessarily yours, but it's very specific. So Site and Neighborhood Standards reviews have actually halted some development when there's found to be a problem. And in certain instances, it's not, because a developer or whomever provides information for us, right? And so if let's say you have a situation where it looks like, oh, based on the last census, It looks like these are the demographics, and this is probably not a location. Well, it's factored because, hey, maybe something has happened since that last census was taken. Maybe the area is actually turning over, you might say, as some would say. So that kind of level of detail needs to take place before like a broad brush. But like I said before, under certain circumstances, in like neighborhood context, certain developments have been given the red, you might say, when they are reconcentrating poverty. For instance, if you've got a neighborhood that has a lot of housing choice vouchers, a lot of low-income housing tax credits, it has a lot of project-based vouchers, when you look at that in totality, right, you may be looking at this new development further concentrating poverty, and that would be an issue in many instances. So I hope that answers your question. And like I said, my colleague from PIH can kind of delve into some other issues. Also, I think the issue of source of income discrimination might be something of interest to you all. This is a huge problem across the country. If it's a problem where you are, you're not unique. It's a huge problem. HUD is clearly looking at this issue and trying to see what could be done about it. In the interim, we certainly are trying to make sure that landlords are voluntarily at least brought into the program as much as possible. Some cities and counties and states have actually adopted ordinances and statutes to actually address the issue of source of income discrimination, meaning that landlords find somebody that otherwise would be a perfectly good tenant and they pass the screening criteria. However, those folks perhaps say no to the person simply because they're using a housing choice voucher. And so that's where states and local folks have adopted ordinances. Some places have actually called for and found funding through various types of streams that they may have so that they can pay landlord incentives to really kind of coax a landlord into joining the program for the first time. I've seen it done in certain states where they've used some of their CDBG development. I've seen people talk about using their housing trust funds and other funds that they may have. So I'm not sure if you guys have all of those levels of funding available, but some jurisdictions have been using various levels of independent streams of funding to help try to create a landlord incentive program, or to the extent some landlords actually believe, and I would say it's a myth, believe that housing choice voucher holders, quote unquote, ruin units more so than market unit tenants do. Even though that's shown to have been a myth, some jurisdictions have created a fund, you might say, that's available for the landlord if, in fact, they feel as if they're not going to be able to fix the unit up beyond normal wear and tear. So that's another that we've seen. And again, my PIH colleagues might have a few more examples.
Okay.
On the issue of, I'm sorry.
I was just going to, and that is something that we want to do here. We do have anti-SOI discrimination laws on the books in Santa Monica, actually preceding the entire state of California, which now has it as a law. But it's still a widespread problem here. And the Housing Commission is interested in some of those incentives programs and reaching out to landlords. I wanted to ask you about voucher payment standards. In Santa Monica, our current voucher.
Okay, well.
Oh, okay.
Why don't you let me do this? That's more for my PIH colleague, right? So we have different parts of HUD.
Okay.
The Fair Housing Act doesn't deal with payment standards per se, but certainly the issue of how much payment standards are can dictate or steer voucher holders to certain communities, right? And so that is something that fair housing advocates have looked at as a means to try to firmly further fair housing or what have you, the payment standards. But I'll let him get into the details of the payment standards. So I'll press on. I'm almost done here so you can get to the heart of the public housing questions that you have.
Okay.
So we do have.
Oh, sorry, go
ahead.
I was going to ask if resident advisory boards were in your wheelhouse level. Just
no, everything related to public housing.
Everything.
So everything related to public housing is for the public housing staff.
Okay.
And so to the extent it crosses over with fair housing, then I'll be able to talk about that. But happy to talk about just real quickly, like I said, just have a couple more things I think were of interest to you on
Mhm.
the issue of accessibility and disability. We have what's called a FIRST program. And really it is FIRST, meaning putting the idea and thought about design and construction of homes first so that you don't have to go back and fix the problem later, is why it's
Yeah.
called the FIRST program. And so this program actually provides technical assistance on disability matters, for free online training. And so folks can take advantage of some of those seminars and workshops. We can provide you the link to that later on program, because I think we've had trainings throughout the month of September, and others will be provided later on. And so the issue of accessibility and disability remain an issue. It's quite often kind of too many housing of these kind of like fall through the cracks, and we have to manage complaints actually that we receive from either individuals or community groups regarding some of their disability matters. And the last thing I'll focus on here is some of your issues and questions regarding home ownership. Home ownership is a real priority of Secretary Fudge, and I send her greetings to you.
Thank you.
HUD has hers. We have housing counselor program, and they're across the country, and they actually provide advice on buying a home, renting a home, default and foreclosure avoidance, and credit issues, as well as reverse mortgages. And so we sponsor these counseling agencies all around the country. Like I said, they're free. Or they provide, in some instances, low-cost advice. You can go to our HUD's website and look up housing counseling, or you can call 800 number available for folks who are interested. It's 1-800-569-4287 to get in contact with the housing counselor. And lastly, I will say there is a huge home ownership gap and real wealth gap today that is bigger than it was in 1968 when the Fair Housing Act was passed. And so this is a real priority of the Secretary. Our Federal Housing Administration over at HUD, which is another part of HUD, we all do have different parts to this thing called housing at HUD. That team, that's a different team. That team actually has been adopting policies actually to help first-time homeowners. Things like adjusting how they deal with student loan, right? Things like prioritizing nonprofits to buy the houses that end up falling in foreclosure or in the inventory of the FHA, so that those nonprofit buyers instead of for-profit buyers will actually sell the home to someone who's a bit lower income, so that folks can become first-time home buyers. And so listen, what I'm going to do for you folks is I'm going to very quickly turn it over to Ken Carroll, who's in the Fair Housing Office in Region 9. And from there, we'll kick right over to my PH colleagues, whom I think you have lots of questions for. So will that work for you, Madam Chair?
That sounds great. Thank you so much, Pete S. McCain.
All right, thanks.
Thank you, Demetria. I'll just give you a very brief overview of my office. Again, my office is the Region 9 Office of Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity at HUD. We're not PIH, Public and Indian Housing again. We're sort of like Demetria in the regional offices. We cover, or my team covers, or carries out HUD's Fair Housing mission in California, Nevada, Arizona, Hawaii, and the Pacific Island territories of Guam, Samoa, and the Northern Marianas Islands. So that equals about 54 million people in the United States that we provide service to. We're a very lean team of 28 throughout the region. We have an intake branch that takes in complaints of housing discrimination from people within our region. And we have an enforcement branch that investigates and attempts to resolve those complaints of housing discrimination. And we have a civil rights program compliance branch, which works with recipients of HUD funding to ensure that they're in compliance with our federal civil rights authorities. And in our compliance branch, we do more affirmative work in terms of going out and doing compliance reviews of recipients to ensure that they're meeting their civil rights obligations. we serve a massive area population-wise. We're a small team, but we do really great work. My team is phenomenal. The only other thing that I just wanted to mention, I know there was this question that was raised about sort of other ways of combating systemic housing discrimination. And the thing that I just wanted to emphasize is that, at least from my perspective, one of the great things about the Fair Housing Act, as compared to other civil rights laws, is that it contemplates multiple avenues of enforcement of fair housing laws. So it contemplates a role for HUD. It contemplates a role for the U.S. Department of Justice. It contemplates a role for substantially equivalent state and local government agencies. In California, that's the, right now it's called the California Civil Rights Department. It used to be called DFEH. And it contemplates the role of nonprofit private fair housing organizations. And within Santa Monica, just in terms of information about who serves Santa Monica in terms of those various avenues of fair housing enforcement, again, there's our office, which is HUD Region 9 FHEO. There is the California Civil Rights Department, formerly DFEH, and there's also a private nonprofit fair housing organization that includes Santa Monica as part of its service area, and that's the Housing Rights Center of Los Angeles. So the only final thing I just wanted to leave you with is that if somebody wants to file a complaint with our office, with HUD's Office of Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity, they can do that online at hud.gov/fairhousing. They can also call us at our housing discrimination hotline. We have a local number of 800-347-3739, and then a national number of 800-669-9777. So that's essentially all I have to say, unless there are questions for me. Michelle?
Yes, thank you for that. I did want to ask about voucher payment standards. In Santa Monica, they're over 6 years old, and they are well below fair market rates and even below local so-called affordable rates. And they're based on a federally granted exception to the metro area FMR, or fair market rate. Now, the Housing Authority claims that increasing the payment standards would reduce the total number of vouchers that they could issue. Could you please discuss the importance of sufficiently high payment standards, including their contribution to affirmatively furthering fair housing? And after that, perhaps discuss the merits of small area FMR versus metro FMR as a basis for setting voucher payment standards?
Yeah, I'm going to actually turn this over now to my PIH colleagues, Michelle, because again, I'm FHEO Fair Housing, so it's a perfect segue into HUD's Office of Public and Indian Housing. So I see Doug has his camera on. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear. Oh, am I muted?
No, we can hear you just fine.
Okay. Nice to see you all, and thanks for inviting us to do this. So, yeah, I'm Doug Rice. I'm a policy advisor in the Office of Public and Indian Housing here in headquarters, and where I work almost entirely on housing choice voucher policy. And just to frame our work a little bit similarly to the way Demetria did hers, as you probably realize, here in headquarters, we set broad policy and write detailed regulations to implement policy and administer the programs and oversee program implementation at a very high level. But of course, much of the detailed oversight and technical assistance and other support for housing authorities and communities is really provided by the field offices. And so I'm happy to have some field office staff with us here that Demetria mentioned, Mina Bhavin, who's the Director of Public Housing in the LA field office, and then a couple of her colleagues too. So they're really the ones who work closely with housing authorities when they're facing challenges and help them to identify strategies to overcome those challenges and solutions as well. So just to take a step back, I kind of want to return briefly to the question you started with about concentration of vouchers, because this is a critical issue for the voucher program. So there's no doubt that a core goal of the voucher program is to avert undue concentrations of voucher holders in areas where there's high concentrations of poverty, relatively few resources and opportunities for families. And then on the flip side, to do what we can to expand families' access to other areas where there are opportunities and quality schools and other things that they may wish to have access to. But this is only one of the core goals. There are others that affect families in particular. Other goals include just simply maximizing the number of families that receive assistance. I'm sure all of you are acutely aware that rental assistance is scarce. Only about 1 in 4 eligible households receives any type of federal rental assistance at all. And so it is important that we do our best to maximize the reach of the dollars we have to assist as many people as possible. Ensuring that people who do receive a rental assistance pay rents that are affordable to them. So avoiding rent burdens that are too high is another core goal. Ensuring that the homes they live in meet at least minimum federal quality standards. So basic conditions are safe and healthy. So there are all these, these are really what I think of as the core goals of the program insofar as they directly affect families. All of them are important. To some extent, program rules set under the law and by HUD and regulation set some guardrails, detailed guardrails on some of these things. So for instance, a family cannot use a voucher. There cannot be a rental assistance contract for a unit until the housing authority has inspected the unit and it's passed the inspection. It meets basic quality standards. Similarly, if vouchers are too highly concentrated in high poverty areas, obviously in many cases, HUD will recommend that PHAs take steps. But in some cases, HUD actually mandates that they do too. And so there's 24 metro areas around the country where PHAs are required to use small area fair market rents as a partial remedy to concentration problems that have been identified. LA County is not one of those. San Diego County is one of those. Sacramento is, but LA is not.
Can you talk about the both the importance of having sufficiently high payment standards?
Sure.
Again, the local housing authority claims that increasing the payment standards would minimize the number of vouchers that they could issue. However, I say if you made all the vouchers $100 a piece, then everyone could have a cardboard box of their own. So I'm not sure what you're accomplishing.
Right. So that's where I was headed here, is that
Okay.
there are these core goals, limited resources, and to some extent there are trade-offs, right? So if a housing authority has, say they've got, $10,000 that they can spend, they have to decide whether they're going to spend it to issue another voucher and help someone else off their waiting list, or
it's not an iPhone. Stop calling it an iPhone.
I'm sorry. Hold on, please.
Were you up to this?
Agnieszka, could you please silence?
Yes, I'm trying to see who
Thank
is
you.
unmuted. I'm looking at it now. I think I just muted someone.
Thank you. Sorry, go ahead, Doug.
Sure. Another option is to increase payment standards, which will, as you all know, payment standards are basically the maximum amount of rent that a voucher will cover. And you can use the money to increase payment standards, either to reduce rent burdens for families or to expand their access to higher rent areas in the community. But there are trade-offs for sure. And so housing authorities do have significant discretion in deciding how exactly they, how to strike the right balance between some of these trade-offs in administering their programs. And in the when it's done well, they do so in a way that reflects their own goals, but as well as the goals and community and priorities that exist in the broader community. We certainly encourage housing authorities
Support for WAMU comes from
in setting
the
their
Notre Dame
plans
IBM
to
Tech Ethics Lab, seeking project proposals from practitioners and scholars as part of its Auditing AI initiative. More at techethicslab.nd.edu.
I'm sorry, please go ahead.
That's okay.
Um,
And so a little more about payment standards. Absolutely, setting payment standards at a level that ensures adequate access to a range of units around the community is critically important, and it's one of the strategies to expand access to units in higher rent areas where there are potentially higher quality schools and other opportunities for folks to take advantage of. There are other ways of expanding access. You mentioned incentives for landlords. HUD recently issued a notice that clarifies that housing authorities may use their administrative fees to pay for landlord incentives. They have a lot of flexibility with respect to how to structure those incentives. They can be, bonus payments for new landlords that have never accepted vouchers before to attract them to the program. They can be used for things like setting up a damage mitigation fund that can be, some landlords have concerns about potential damage to units. Whether those concerns are grounded in facts or not doesn't really matter. And some housing authorities have had success in alleviating those concerns by offering damage mitigation payments as a response. Housing authorities can provide families with more robust housing search assistance. That's certainly, there have been studies that show that how what's called housing navigation assistance can be really effective in helping families to identify units, including units in high opportunity areas and accessing those.
That's one of the positions, that's the housing navigator is one of the positions that we do not currently have in our housing authority and that we'd very much like to see added. Yeah.
I have to mention too, though, all of these things require resources, right? And the reality is that from a housing authority perspective, all of these things, for the most part, have to be paid for out of their administrative fees. And administrative fees have been not funded at a high level for quite some time now here in Washington. There's been roughly a decade in which the amount of administrative fee funding that housing authorities receive is, been on the order of 80 cents on the dollar for which they're eligible under HUD's formula. Now, recently under this administration, we made some progress, and the administrative fees this year are up to 92%, which is quite a bit better than it has been in some recent years. But there's no doubt that that fees are, scarcity of fees is an issue. The other thing that we hear a lot about when it comes to these kinds of issues is just the challenges that housing authorities are having in filling their positions and, and recruiting and retaining staff. In some respects, they're not too different from a lot of other employers in the economy right now. The employment rate's very low. Workers have options, and they're exercising their ability to choose among jobs or leave jobs and seek other opportunities. And I think especially in a space like this, which, for lack of a better word, it kind of falls within the social work space, I would guess. It can be very difficult to attract and retain staff, and we've heard that a lot from housing authorities, really all over the country.
Can you tell me if it's required of housing authorities to advertise their vacant positions to their program participants?
I don't know the answer to that. Yeah, that's a good question.
Because I know some housing authorities that do that, and I think it's a fantastic practice.
Yeah.
They don't currently do it here. And
there are requirements in the public housing world and other HUD programs where there's development activity and that sort of thing. They're called Section 3 requirements that require that housing authorities make an effort to make the jobs created by that kind of development work available to residents and other just low-income people too. But I'm not aware of a requirement like that in the voucher program, though. I'd have to check. So
okay, I wanted to go back. You mentioned that housing authorities have tremendous discretion in some areas, and that brings to mind for me resident advisory board.
Mm-hmm.
Because their input is going to impact primarily areas of potential discretion. Now, the Santa Monica Housing Authority has never had a functioning RAB. And in the last 3 years especially, there's been very vigorous advocacy and significant interest by housing authority clients in participating in a RAB. However, as you know, all voucher holders, and we are a voucher-only jurisdiction, all voucher holders are scattered and their contact information is private, so the only way for them to communicate is with the assistance of the housing authority. Now, last night, 2 nights ago, there was a meeting of the Housing Authority Board at which the Housing Commission, which is this body, made recommendations to facilitate a meaningful and functioning RAB. And while the board was largely supportive of our general recommendations, they're allowing staff to further delay any action. And this has been going on for years. So my question is, can you speak a little about why RABs are important and what recourse housing authority clients have when the housing authority obstructs client organizing?
Well, the first question, but I certainly agree that ensuring that residents and really broadly other stakeholders in the community have robust opportunities to provide input to housing authorities' work, their plans, is critical to the program, and the importance of this is evident in many ways. I mean, that's one reason that, you know, when a housing authority, they have to submit annual plans, 5-year plans, and there are supposed to be robust processes in place to ensure that the community stakeholders of different kinds have a chance to provide input on that plan, and they're supposed to consider it and take it seriously as well. When it comes to RABs in particular, you know, I think in outline, the goals are similar, of course. The regulations on this are very basic, I have to say. Every housing authority is required to establish one or more resident advisory boards. And if they administer a voucher program, that board has to ensure adequate representation. If it's a voucher program of a certain minimum size, that board has to ensure adequate representation by voucher tenants. Now, for a voucher-only agency, that means it's going to be all voucher tenants. And yeah, it's a key requirement, and they certainly are supposed to set up a board that provides voucher tenants with a chance to provide their input on the agency's work and their plans and strategies and so on. But in terms of actually selecting the composition the regulations do give housing authorities a lot of discretion with respect to how to do that, so long as it's considered reasonable and that the resulting board is, can reasonably be thought of as being representative of the tenants.
Again, that hasn't happened, and one of the concerns, and this came up in the staff presentation or 2 nights ago with the Housing Authority Board, is that apparently the Santa Monica Housing Authority has managed to fill out forms in such a way that, at least according to staff, they've been told that they're fulfilling their requirements, which I can tell you are absolutely not happening. There's a loophole for RABs that if a housing authority has done its best to recruit representatives and they have absolutely no response, that they're able to, as a last resort, designate all of the clients as RAB representatives, and that's what they've chosen to do here. But again, this is despite the fact that there are many people who would like very much to organize and participate in a RAB and speak with each other, and the Housing Authority continues to prevent that communication from happening amongst those RAB members. So what kind of recourse do program participants have when they're being prevented from organizing?
Well, organizing's a somewhat different question. Housing authorities are supposed to provide tenants with a minimum amount of adequate resources so that they can participate in a RAB. They're supposed to, right? And so oversight of that occurs primarily at the local levels, and that's one reason we invited the field office staff here, so that they could listen to these concerns and take them into account.
Okay, thank you for that. And then I wanted to ask, in general, our housing authority currently has less than half the staff that it needs. There's no dedicated manager. Staff have failed to apply for numerous available HUD grants that are needed to support current programs. And the Housing Authority is also rife with disability discrimination, inaccessibility, and ADA violation. Now, it's a bit confusing because on paper, I understand they're categorized as one of the high-performing authorities. That's clearly not the case on the ground. We actually are in the process of waiting for the returns on FOIA requests. There was there was an audit made of the Housing Authority several years ago, and apparently the outcome of that was meant to be somewhat they were trying to correct the problems in the Housing Authority, and initial FOIA requests were given responses that they were not available for public view, the outcome of the audit, because it might interfere with corrective efforts. So we have there's a lot of opacity here, and problems with the Housing Authority, and difficulty with us when we're trying to remedy these things and at least find out what's going on. So how can HUD intervene to support an individual housing authority that's having problems and ensure their full compliance with federal and local regulations beyond, forcing individuals to make multiple individual complaints about small items when there are clearly large systemic problems with an individual housing agency? Is there a mechanism for HUD to intervene in that case?
Well, the strategy that, generally, a lot of what you've identified are kind of operational concerns, right? And generally the strategy that HUD takes is for field offices to work closely with housing authorities, and if they identify problems, to provide some guidance and technical assistance to help them, figure out how to do better. And that's really the overall strategy from our standpoint for at least some of the things you've been talking about. Now, ADA violations and that sort of thing. That's more Demetria's bailiwick than mine.
Now, I'm very glad that Demetria, that you asked a representative of the local field office to be here, and I look forward to speaking with them. We have a number of housing authority program participants have individually and sometimes in small groups sent numerous complaints to the local field office and asked for assistance with this housing authority, and we have never received a response. I say we because I am also a housing authority program participant. I have a Section 8 voucher, a tenant-based HCV voucher. So while I hope that this helps open dialogue with the local field office, just hypothetically, if you don't get traction with the local field office, what is your recourse after that?
So this is Mina Baban from the director of the field office, and I definitely want to correct.
Mina, can we just clarify?
Yeah.
So we've got somebody from the Public Housing Local Field Office. We also have Ken, who's from the Fair Housing Local Office. So which one are you talking about, and where did the complaints go?
I'm sorry, I was talking about the LA field office, not
Public Housing Office. Yeah, we've definitely responded to correspondence from you. Don't know. So
Michelle, I'm sorry, Michelle, let's just clarify. We as a LA field office. So are you talking about complaints to the public housing part of HUD or complaints through the Fair Housing Office of HUD? Because those are two very different offices.
Well, I personally have had much interaction with FHEO myself. I've submitted a number of complaints.
Okay.
The response initially was that they didn't have a finding of disability discrimination because in their estimation, it didn't seem to be intentional discrimination but mismanagement, which didn't really didn't really help the situation, although the staff members were helpful in resolving things at the time. But there have been a number of voucher holders who have tried to contact the LA, not Fair Housing, just the local LA field office for HUD, and haven't, I guess, gotten much significant response. And again, I'm delighted that Mina is here tonight and that we can have a more open dialogue. It's helpful for us to know what the organizational chart looks like within HUD, so
Absolutely.
we understand who we can escalate to when we don't get responses.
Yes, totally understand. So Mina is not with the Fair Housing Office. Mina is with the Public Housing Office, right? And so just to make matters more complicated, we also have what's called FPM, which is a separate field office that's not FHEO and they're not public housing. So, but what's important though, Michelle and everybody, you have Ken on the line from FHEO. We're going to send you guys a follow-up email with the resources, contact information, and those kind of things that relate to your part of the country. Okay? And that should help alleviate some of these issues, is my hope.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
So just to clarify, you said that there's public housing that would control vouchers as well as traditional public housing, correct? Okay, and so we have FHEO, public housing, and then I'm sorry, I missed the last acronym, three letters that.
FPM is Field Policy Management. Quite often they're the front line of in the local sense. And what they do is, because they don't manage any particular program, what they do is funnel questions and concerns to the respective offices.
Well,
so
we very
policy.
We very much look forward to getting contact information and appreciate the clarity on some of the structure, because it is a bit confusing.
Hey, Michelle.
Dense bureaucracy. Yes.
Michelle, this is Ken Carroll.
Yes.
I just wanted to follow up on an issue you were raising related to RABs, right? And just tenants having ways or knowing ways of exercising their rights, right? While it's not required, one of the things that a lot of cities, jurisdictions do is they fund local nonprofit fair housing organizations to sort of help people on the very local level exercise their rights, whether it's fair housing rights, whether it's landlord-tenant issues, whether it's tenant organizing. And I don't think Santa Monica funds a local fair housing organization. That was what I was sort of alluding to when I mentioned the Housing Rights Center of Los Angeles, which includes Santa Monica as part of its service area. But if you go to the Santa Monica City website for help in exercising fair housing rights, it steers folks to a city office, not a local nonprofit external organization. So that's just a thought, something to think about in terms of maybe ways of helping people, both voucher holders as well as just the general community, in terms of very local assistance in exercising their rights.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Did any of our guests want to contribute anything else before we move into?
Yeah, I just kind of want to close the loop. It sounds like you guys just have some basic decisions to make as a community, right? Because it sounds like you really kind of know some of the issues. You just have to make some decisions. For instance, the issue of small area FMRs. Well, clearly, and I won't talk about the details of where I used to work, but clearly small FMRs were adopted at HUD following concerns of segregation at the local level in one part of this country. And so even when small area FMRs were introduced and adopted officially, not just for that one jurisdiction, but on a broader sense, as Doug kind of mentioned, 8 jurisdictions that mandatorily have to participate in small area FMRs, there was certainly the argument that, oh, well, then it won't provide enough funding for enough vouchers. So this is not new. It's really kind of, both of these arguments have been used nationwide. It's a matter of communities deciding what their policy priorities are going to be, and in the AFFH sense, deciding what those policy priorities are going to be in the context of looking at comprehensively whether or not they're affirmatively furthering for housing. In the chat, somebody asked for a link to the proposed rule. It's not public yet. Like I said, I'm hoping that it will become public by this fall. So if you go to the FHO's website, there's a place where you can sign up for to be on our listserv, and hopefully we'll be able to push that out once it is made public. We also have social media that you can follow, both on Twitter and on Facebook, the Office of Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity. So I just wanted to make sure I was clear about that.
No, I appreciate that. I wanted to ask you, just because it seems like something that the country would benefit from having come from HUD headquarters. Have you guys considered at all a public service announcement campaign to help destigmatize public housing and public housing vouchers to reduce source of income discrimination? It's something I've thought about for here, but it really seems like something that would happen most successfully if it were orchestrated at the top.
Doug, why don't you answer that? I've heard of local jurisdictions trying to do that, but that would be in the PIH camp.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting idea, and it's not the first time I've heard it or been involved in discussions with it. I mean, HUD's strategy in recent years has been to do more aggressive outreach directly with landlords and encouraging encouraging housing authorities to do that similarly at local levels. We've held a whole series of roundtables, symposia with landlords around the country in recent years. We're planning to do 8 or 10 more in the coming year. HUD has produced a lot of materials for landlords explaining the potential benefits of participating in the program and try to alleviate some of their concerns and address myths that exist out there. Now, and so we've taken kind of baby steps in that direction. It's not the same as a national, campaign that involves a lot of expensive media. I mean, some communities have done this though. I mean, somebody pointed out to me recently, there's an I Vouch for Vouchers campaign in New York City, billboards and signs on buses, and a lot of it's testimonials from landlords who participate in the program, talking about why they like it. And I certainly encourage housing authorities, communities to do that sort of thing. We're kind of doing the best we can right now with the resources we have to provide housing authorities and landlords with resources to expand
And
the
if
reach
I
of
can
the
hop
program.
in there, Doug, I really think that this is just my opinion. I think that it's the local level who knows the market, right? What messaging that works in one part of the country might not work in another part of the country. So whether or not you're suggesting that perhaps there be resource opportunities, or maybe at the local level, that kind of thing to take place, it's something we can take back and further discuss.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's a good point about messaging and different. Let's see. Did Mina want to speak with us?
Sure, I could just say some
Discreetly,
closing
or?
remarks. I've been hearing, yes, definitely listening to everything that's been said and appreciate feedback. And as I mentioned, right, we've definitely heard some of these concerns before and acknowledged the capacity challenges that Santa Monica, as well as our other PHAs across our region, have had, especially during the pandemic. Acknowledging the RAB issues, right? Early on, I think Santa Monica didn't even have a RAB, and we worked with Santa Monica to get that RAB for their section-only tenants in place.
No.
And so, and also, with the payment standards issues, yes, we've definitely been engaged with those conversations with the PHA. Again, highlighting the capacity challenges, right? The staffing challenges. It's been difficult to continue those conversations through the pandemic, but with these new FY23 FMRs that Doug mentioned, right, noted, I think we will definitely be having ongoing conversations with the Housing Authority to reassess their payment standards. And fortunately, the new FMRs better reflect the local markets, right? And so definitely we will be engaging the PHA on that, right? And to the staffing front, they finally got some program analysts in place that I think will assist with that. And so, yeah, I'm hopeful that we can we can work with the PHA to address some of these issues.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd like to correct a few misconceptions, perhaps. First of all, because we stopped arguing semantics, I will concede that perhaps on paper there is the thinnest veneer of the impression of a RAB, but the RAB here, so-called, is a charade. It's again, it's something that's been claimed in order to check a box on forms, and it absolutely is the representation that is required by federal regulations is not instituted here, and it's a serious problem. Second of all, I don't know about any new hires with the Housing Authority. They currently have 5 vacancies and of 11, and that doesn't even include 3 positions that they should have that they're no longer even keeping placeholders for.
Well, we did get some recent updates for this
What's
call.
that?
We did get some recent updates from the PHA, so staff. So
okay,
that's,
yeah,
that's the latest update. So yeah.
Okay, so I'm not sure what that's referring to in terms of a new hire. In terms of the payment standard, the Santa Monica Housing Authority's current payment standard is based on an exception to the Metro FMR. this is kind of a very nuanced point, but I just wanted to bring it to your attention that when the baseline FMR that an exception is based off of is as low as it is, it makes it it is inherently discriminatory for disabled people who need to request reasonable accommodations of increased payment standards in order to get accessible housing, which is something that I tried to do, because the HUD regulations say that, I believe it's been a while, but I think they say that up to a 20% increase can be done at the discretion of the local housing authority, and anything above that up to, I think, 30 or 40% has to be approved by the local field office. However, it's based on a percentage of the underlying FMR. And so if the exception payment standard is significantly higher than the base FMR, then even with a waiver with that increased percentage, the increase doesn't even meet the existing payment standards, if that makes sense. I see Doug kind of nodding your head. So it's an underlying concern for me in terms of what data they choose to base their payment standards on. I think it's important that they look at small area FMRs, and if necessary, ask for an exception based on the small area FMR to at least raise that bar a bit. But yeah, in general, I'm on our current below market housing list in Santa Monica, and I regularly receive notices about new quote unquote affordable apartments that are available. And overwhelmingly, they are 300 square foot studio apartments that start at $2,100, which is it far exceeds any of the payment standards for any of our voucher holders. So none of what we consider to be affordable housing in Santa Monica is accessible to any client of the housing authority. And that's just an illustration. There are other, issues with the payment standard here. But at some point, you talked, Doug, about the trade-offs. I understand and agree that a fixed amount of money will require trade-offs, but at some point, a payment standard so low that you cannot get any apartment for that amount, it defeats, there's no efficacy for the vouchers. They become virtually meaningless. And so I'm not sure what the benefit is of having an increased number of vouchers if you can't have a successful, execution of that voucher in actually getting housing. So
sure.
I love
respond to a couple of things. I mean, one, just
Please.
to emphasize, HUD FMRs are a perennial concern around the country. The data they're based on primarily, the local data is always 2 or 3 years old. And then inflation factors were applied to them to estimate FMRs for the current year. That, and it's just, it's built in that at best they're a loose approximation of where markets might be in the year in which they apply. And that's why the law and the regulations build in a fair amount of flexibility for housing authorities with respect to setting payment standards above or below FMRs. And however, in the last 2 years, things have been unusually difficult, and HUD recognized not pretty quickly after estimating the fair market rents for 2022 that they were wildly out of sync with some markets, many markets around the country, because as the pandemic subsided some, we've seen historically low vacancy rates, the sharpest rent increases we've seen in many markets around the country. And it's been a real problem, and not just in the usual places like California and New York, but really across the country. And we did try to provide housing authorities with some additional flexibility in the last 2 years to set higher payment standards without coming to HUD, except on a pro forma basis. which has helped some. We got a lot of take up on that from housing authorities. About 40% of housing authorities administering 40% of the vouchers requested that waiver on an expedited basis. But HUD is just, and this is what Mina was referring to, HUD has just released new FMRs for 2023 that take into account some private market data sources that we think much better reflect the reality on the ground in a lot of communities. So nationally, there's a roughly a 10% increase in the FMR compared to 2022. It varies a lot from place to place. You know, some places it's 20 or 30%, others it's less than 10%. But we are hopeful that that's going to provide an opportunity for housing authorities to make adjustments that do better reflect the conditions in local markets around the country. I think we are also likely to extend the waiver opportunity that we provided to allow every housing authority to go up to 120%, though Santa Monica already has an exception, it sounds like, so it's not going to be relevant there. And so as Mina said, field offices around the country are going to be working with encouraging housing authorities to make adjustments to their payment standards as quickly as possible now that we have these new FMRs in place that are somewhat higher in most areas, to adjust their payment standards so voucher holders have a better chance at leasing up as well as to access some higher rent areas. I do want to mention, because I made the comment about trade-offs, and that was really in relation to raising payment standards overall. Small area fair market rents are a little bit different, and that's because, at least if you implement small area fair market rents in total, so for the entire jurisdiction, you're going to see reductions in the payment standards in some areas, coincident with increases in other areas. And so while the details by community matter a lot, it matters, how much variation in rents there is across a community. It matters how the housing authority implements them, because housing authorities have the ability to protect tenants in those areas where the small area fair market rent is well below the fair market rent. Housing authorities can protect them from sharp rent increases, which increases costs, right? So depending on implementation, it matters a lot. But the few studies that have been done show that there's, overall, for communities that have opted in totally, there hasn't really been a significant increase in cost. So again, it can vary a lot depending on how it's implemented and the conditions on the ground. I just wanted to mention that, because small area fair market rents are a little bit different than just raising payment standards overall.
Right. No, I understand that. And we actually have a concern with the small area FMR that would apply here. One of the zip codes is the data is wrong. And we actually, several of us sent comments. It's hard to keep track. We've reached out and corresponded with so many offices and divisions of HUD and even OIG. But it was before they put out the new list of which areas were required to use smaller area FMRs. I believe we gave feedback asking for them to reassess some of the zip codes here, and we didn't hear back about that. I would love for whomever is going to be following up with us and sending us contact information. I would love to know what division, because I tried contacting, the data division of HUD, and apparently they don't want to talk to me directly, which is fair.
Well, right. I mean, housing authorities can request a reevaluation if they think the FMRs or small area FMRs are too low. Though they have to typically supply data to justify why they think they're too low. And HUD receives dozens of these requests every year, so it's common.
Okay, and I just wanted to, again, I realize it's a really niche area that affects a small number of people, but for the people it does impact, it impacts them significantly. That for those of you who specifically work on fair housing, I encourage you to look at to reconsider the general policies that dictate the total percentage or the basis for the total percentage for reasonable accommodation requests to increase payment standards that fix basing that percentage 120 or 140% on the area FMR when there's an exception payment standard renders that direction virtually meaningless. So I encourage you to re-examine that because that would make a very big difference to a small but considerable number of people. Now, we are following our Q&A with a listening session. So I would now like to open this up to the Housing Commission and Housing Commissioners, and then after that, we will open it up to the public for public comment. Yes,
and I will say that my Ken Carroll, who's on Pacific time, is going to remain on the call. I am going to have to bow out to prepare for some other things I have to do tomorrow morning. But you guys are a very informed group, and so I commend you for that. And we certainly will be following up with some contact info and try to make sure that you're getting to the right places. So
thank you so much, Secretary McCain. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and your time with us. Have a great night.
Thank you so much.
You too. Bye-bye.
And I'm not sure, I would like to hear from one of the guests that are still with us. If you can answer the question, I'm not sure I heard an answer about what the next step in the chain is if we don't receive the response that we need from the local field office. I'd like to know which office we can escalate that to. That would be helpful, particularly for Region 9. But having said that, we're going to open it up to the Housing Commission for the beginning of our listening session. Our guests are going to listen to the thoughts and concerns and questions of the Commission and the public at large concerning affirmatively furthering fair and affordable housing. So are there any commissioners first who would like to?
I just have a quick question, if I may.
Sure.
So which HUD office would one file a complaint if it's perceived that the city violates the affirmatively further fair housing law?
Do we have one of our HUD guests who can answer that for us?
Yes. Ken Carroll, you would file it with my office, which is HUD FHEO Region 9. And as Demetria said, we're going to be providing you with a list of resources and sort of a way to navigate HUD in terms of where you go for what.
Fantastic.
But you can also go to www.hud.gov, file a fair housing complaint there.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Borison?
Yes, I have two, wide-ranging questions. Santa Monica doesn't have any classical public housing, but it does have 100% affordable housing built by nonprofits. And I'm confused about what the difference is. And for the Resident Advisory Board, I've heard that residents in the classic public housing are allowed to be on the RAB, but residents in the 100% affordable nonprofit housing are not. And maybe I've got that upside down there. That's the first question.
I can address part of you for that, Commissioner Borison, just because some of it involves city practices that don't directly relate to HUD. our jurisdiction is considered a voucher-only jurisdiction, so the housing authority does not own any property outright that they run as public housing per se. The model that they generally use in the city is the city setting aside money for local nonprofit housing providers to build and run their own 100% affordable housing. And so there's a middle person there. And so that doesn't actually fall under the purview of the housing authority.
I would say that, you know, if it walks like a duck, then I don't see how those buildings are exempt from the RAB, because the city has put a middleman in between the residents and themselves. So that'd be I see it as a technicality. The second question is, I believe in allowing voucher holders to live anywhere in the city. That's great. Then there's this, historically throughout LA, occasionally in Santa Monica, there has been like an anti-gentrification movement where stores or market rate housing has been discouraged from lower income neighborhoods through fears of raising the rent or, you know, gentrification in general, which is kind of will tend to keep those neighborhoods resource poor. So would HUD's view anti-gentrification to be another leg of keeping a neighborhood poor rather than allowing those people to move to richer neighborhoods? You should also allow that neighborhood to improve as well. And does HUD have any position on anti-gentrification?
Would any of our guests like to take that one? Perhaps in someone with FHEO?
I can make a general comment. As far as I know, HUD doesn't have a position on gentrification per se. I mean, I do think it's the view in the department as a whole that it's important both to provide families with better opportunities to move into neighborhoods where they want to live, as well as to invest significant resources to help traditionally under-resourced communities to improve and build communities that work well for them. So I think we see it as a both and on the policy front.
Thank you for that. Are there any other commissioners who would like to speak? We seem to have temporarily lost. There we go. Vice Chair Morosco.
So this question is for Doug Rice. I'm going to start there, but I have more to say after I ask this first question. But Santa Monica has several types of vouchers, and in the beginning you said your office oversees mostly housing choice vouchers, and Santa Monica has continuum of care vouchers, home vouchers, emergency housing vouchers, and project-based vouchers, as well as housing choice vouchers. So does your office oversee all of those programs or only housing choice voucher?
Sorry for all the confusion. So the housing choice voucher program includes, you know, the usual portable tenant-based vouchers that are funded by PIH, you know, the PIH program. It includes emergency housing vouchers. That's just a special set of housing vouchers that were funded separately under the American Rescue Plan. Project-based vouchers are just a specific flavor of regular housing choice vouchers. Housing authorities are allowed to project-based up to a certain percentage of their regular vouchers for in specific housing developments. The COC program is administered by the Office of Community Planning and Development, which is a separate office at HUD. They administer the homeless assistance grant programs. CPD also administers the home grant, which is the other type of rental assistance that you mentioned. So the COC rental assistance, the home rental assistance are separate, and we do not oversee those. In some respects, the rules are pretty similar, but the administration is different. And in some respects, the rules are rather different. Home-funded rental assistance is only good for up to 24 months, for example.
And so my next question is there funding that is available to help increase the vouchers in the city of Santa Monica, or the number of vouchers, number one, and to increase programs such as, my understanding is that currently the city of Santa Monica does not access federal housing trust funds. And so because I know that those programs and some of the funding has great flexibility about how they use that funding, is there a reason why the city of Santa Monica would not be applying for those programs? The last that I saw that they did apply for some, I believe it was CDBG funds in 2021, and COC funds have not been applied for since 2018. And when I compared that, looking at other jurisdictions, I saw LA, Long Beach, all the cities surrounding us yearly apply for funding. So I'm just wondering if maybe we're low on funding and we should be applying for that funding to increase the ability to fund more programs or to fund more vouchers.
Yeah, well, on vouchers, HUD does award new vouchers almost every year, but the reality is that the numbers are small, and they tend to be vouchers that are targeted for specific populations. So there's funding almost every year in the appropriations bill for several thousand new vouchers for homeless veterans, that where veterans receive vouchers, they receive services from the VA center in the community. Now, and then, you mentioned the emergency housing vouchers. That was a larger allocation, 70,000 vouchers that were awarded last year. But that's a one-time thing that came out of the American Rescue Plan. HUD will be soon awarding a new allocation of vouchers, about 19,000 total, that were funded in the last appropriations bill. Those, unlike many of the recent rounds, are going out by formula to almost every housing authority in the country. And so long as the housing authority doesn't decline the vouchers, every housing authority, almost every housing authority in the country should receive some. Now, the numbers are small. When you divide 19,000 by 2,000 housing authorities, it's not a huge number of vouchers on average, but every voucher helps. On one other point, because I saw it in one of the questions that you all submitted, local governments, other outside organizations cannot supply a housing authority with money to issue more vouchers. That's not allowed under federal rules. Some cities do, many cities probably, given the shortage of administrative funding, do provide some funding to cover administrative costs for agencies, but they're not able to fund new vouchers. The other sources you mentioned, I'm much less familiar with the allocation processes for the Housing Trust Fund or CDBG. I mean, there are formula grants that go to jurisdictions, and then decisions are made at those jurisdiction levels about how to allocate the funds to projects beyond that. And so all those decisions are made at the local level.
Thank you so much for explaining that. That was
Sure.
a important question I had. And so at this point, I'm just going to mention a few things because this is part of a listening session that probably doesn't really require a response unless anybody wants to respond. But recently, we got the Santa Monica Housing Authority to send out information to all 16 plus subsidized tenants within the city to come to a housing commission meeting.
1,600. Sorry, 1,600 plus families.
Didn't I say that?
You said 16.
Oh, I'm sorry, 1,600.
That's okay.
And so my telephone number was added to that letter. And through that process, I started getting phone calls from everyone, first thinking I was from the Housing Authority, even though it said the Housing Commission, and afraid that they were going to lose their voucher, that this was some horrible letter that's going out and they're terrified. I also learned that there were many people who are either elderly or disabled who don't use internet, and so they don't have a lot of access to, other than calling the Housing Authority or coming to a Housing Commission meeting or having any kind of communication outside of a telephone, which these are ADA issues that we're experiencing here because websites are not ADA accessible within the city, and certainly the Housing Authority itself could be more accessible to some of the clients because even people making phone calls or those who can send emails go unresponded to for weeks. And even personally, I am a voucher holder. Some of my requests went months without being properly responded to. And I do realize that there's a shortage of staff, but what I learned from those phone calls is that people had urgent needs. I learned that the RTAs were not being responded to in a timely manner. I learned that people were learning that they had a voucher issued to them 9 months in the past and they were never contacted. There were several people who told me this. And so this is a serious problem that vouchers were issued in their name and they had no idea. And the fact that we received 104 emergency housing vouchers and last July, not this past July, July 2021, and only 10 of those vouchers have been issued and those people have been housed. Chair Gray did mention that we have 5 vacant positions. Our housing manager, Barbara Collins, left in the beginning of the pandemic. I realized that a lot of employees took an opt-out to retire at that point because of the pandemic. But we have been without a housing manager, an actual housing manager who is running the program from day to day. We have someone who is in that position who doesn't even meet the regular qualifications of a housing manager, according to the advertisements that I've looked up myself and done the research, who actually has a other full-time job within the city. And I don't understand how someone who already had a full-time job is now full-time also running the Housing Authority. And this is very problematic, not to mention the fact that the senior administrative analyst who worked underneath Ms. Collins, Anna Topolewski, left last November, kind of suddenly. And so now we're without a supervisor or a housing manager. Phone calls are not being responded to. Emails are not being responded to. Requests for reasonable accommodations are not being responded to. It was also mentioned that people who do have reasonable accommodation needs and have to move because there is not funding to create that reasonable accommodation in their current housing can't even find housing that will meet their needs because of the low payment standard and the affordable units that advertisements of the affordable units that they're getting are way above the payment standard. So these are some of the red flags that are happening within the city that, to me, in my opinion, not just as a housing commissioner, but as someone who has had their voucher for over 27 years and came from Denver, Colorado 8 years ago and never experienced these kind of problems. Yes, I understand the pandemic has a lot to do with this, but these problems existed before the pandemic. I have been in Santa Monica for 8 years, and these problems have existed since the day I moved here. And so I'm just trying to bring this information to your attention. I think one of the things that really needs to happen immediately is that the city of Santa Monica, because we're at the end stages of pandemic here, I believe that they're lifting all of these mandates and the moratoriums. The Santa Monica Housing Authority does not have a physical office. I believe everybody is working from home. What the existing staff are working from home. We have persons who are needing to go into an office, actually see someone at the front desk like we used to, and to be able to say, I have this problem. I need to speak to my housing my housing specialist, or I need to speak to a supervisor about resolving this problem instead of going weeks and months without resolution. And this is serious because people are becoming homeless because of this. So I just wanted to bring those issues to everyone's attention. This is the feedback that I'm getting from the public. And it is a very large outcry. And I also want to mention one more thing and bring attention to, and one of the people who was experiencing this, their public comment was uploaded to the Housing Commission's website and attached to the agenda, and I did forward it to Peters McCain and also to Mina Bavin. And it is a almost 50-page document from a building here that is mostly comprised of project-based vouchers with elderly and disabled tenants who have been trying to get the attention of FHEO for at least the last couple of years. And I know that he's here and he wants to speak about this, but these are very severe, and I'm sorry, the complaint was about numerous things about the management company of their building and severe habitability issues, and I'll let him speak to that. But these are like major, in my opinion, major red flags where people are falling through the cracks and the Santa Monica Housing Authority is kind of falling apart in a sense. And we did bring them to a panel discussion. The staff of the Housing Authority a couple months back was July 21st, and all of these meetings are online and can be viewed, where it was a 5-hour panel discussion trying to obtain information from the Santa Monica Housing Authority staff. And we still haven't gotten the answers to our questions. But now that is all that I have to say. I don't want to cut time off from the public, but I did want to bring all of those red flags to everyone's. Oh, and the fact that, I'm sorry, and the fact that, and actually, city, we have a legal Los Angeles Legal Aid Foundation attorney in the meeting, Denise McGranahan, who posted in the chat that while we do have a local nonprofit that helps with fair housing issues, they cannot assist Santa Monica Housing Authority program participants because of a conflict. So basically, SMHA program participants are left without any legal assistance unless they can afford a private attorney. So there is no recourse with the Santa Monica Housing Authority as a closed loop system.
Thank you, Vice Chair Marasco. Are there any other commissioners who would like to comment?
I have two comments and questions.
Please,
Commissioner
Commissioner.
Hilton.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
Santa Monica doesn't own or have public housing. We do financially assist 100% nonprofit affordable housing, and the housing represents 2/3 of all of our affordable housing. For example, recently, in the last couple of years, we provided $69 million in local funds to help construct 6 developments with approximately 295 affordable units. We've heard recent references on the commission and from the public that are 100% nonprofit affordable housing. We've heard terms like segregation. There's been suggestions for alternatives, even references to fair housing. First is that Santa Monica has not been identified as having any poverty concentration areas. I know LA City has quite a few areas. So the first question for our distinguished guests is, when and under what circumstances does private or public project housing as a policy or program violate fair housing law? In other words, other than individual resident complaints. And then I have a second question.
Sounds like a question for me, right? So I appreciate that question. I think a better way to frame it might be, there are violations across the board, and more the question is how they come to HUD's attention than how we address them. The public can come to us to file complaints. That's oftentimes how we hear about problems and how we work to ensure compliance. That's one way that we do it. Another way we do it is we do affirmative compliance reviews of recipients to ensure that they're in compliance with the laws that we enforce. And so, the public filing complaints is not the only avenue that HUD has to find issues and address them. We do that by, as I mentioned, compliance reviews that often result in what Dimitri had talked about, which are voluntary compliance agreements. So when we do a compliance review, we do an in-depth investigation. Again, it's not complaint-based, but we essentially do an investigation of the recipient. We might target it to assess compliance with particular civil rights authorities that we have. We might do it much more broadly and cover, the whole array of civil rights authorities that we do. And then typically what we do is, after we do that, we issue a letter of findings identifying the findings and concerns we have as a result of that. And then we enter into discussions with the recipient and negotiations to try to resolve those issues. And a voluntary compliance agreement is usually what results. So we've done a variety of those throughout Region 9. We haven't done one in Santa Monica. I can't make any promises, obviously, but I'm definitely taking notes, and it will be considered in the future. I can promise that.
Thank you. Before you ask your second question, Commissioner Hilton, just because we're still we were just on the subject, Ken, I mentioned earlier that I had initiated several complaints with FHEO on my own behalf. Last year, I was made homeless as a direct result of the disability discrimination experienced by the Housing Authority. It took more than 4 months for them to initially and improperly deny my first reasonable accommodation request. But the feedback that I got from FHEO, they were prompt, and I really appreciated the staff that I worked with. However, their decision is that it wasn't considered discrimination because it looked like it was a result of mismanagement. Now, you know, discrimination, you know, can be systemic. It doesn't require malice on anyone's part. So I guess my question is, at what point do you intervene because something is in effect discriminatory, even if it's not intentional, when it results from mismanagement?
So, Michelle, I can't really speak to your individual complaint. I don't know on the top of my head what that involved. So I'm happy to talk with you online about that more. In terms
Well,
of why we determined, I think from what I'm hearing you say is we determined that we lacked jurisdiction in the matter, right? And that
right. So,
again, I can't speak to the merits of that right now, right? Yeah.
Right, no, I'm sorry. Let me clarify. I wasn't asking you to comment on my particular case. I guess I felt like my particular case was a microcosm of what's happening with a lot of voucher holders. Santa Monica Housing Authority is 67%, I believe, 64, 67% disabled people, and in the mid 60s seniors. And the discrimination complaint I made was based on the fact that the Housing Authority was non-responsive to reasonable accommodation requests. You know, somebody didn't say, we're not going to help you get housing because you're disabled. It wasn't as clear as that. It was, you know, not following federal regulations, HUD and otherwise, about fielding reasonable accommodation requests in a timely manner. And I understand that a lot of people here in the audience and in general, a lot of Housing Authority program participants have that same issue with reasonable accommodation requests going unresponded to for months at a time. And the response that I got is that this seemed to be a result of mismanagement, which I am willing to concede. But in general, it seems like at some point you have to accept that regardless of what created the circumstances, that the impact is ultimately discrimination. And so I'm wondering at what point FHEO could get involved, not again on a case-by-case basis with individual complaints, but looking at an overarching pattern of discrimination resulting from, even if it's mismanagement, that results in unfair housing practices. Vice Chair Marosco.
And actually, Michelle, an undue delay in responding to a reasonable accommodation request is tantamount to a denial. So we do look at cases from that angle as well. But I think in terms of the broader issue of, you know, failing to respond to reasonable accommodation requests in a timely manner would be something that could be looked at more effectively through a compliance review, which is what I was just discussing. So that would potentially be the route for HUD, FHEO to look at that issue, something much more systemic, broad, and you know, potentially, if resolved, could impact a large number of people in a positive way.
Fantastic, thank you. Vice Chair Marosco, did you have a brief comment before we need to go back?
I just wanted to make a correction. My apologies to Attorney Denise McGranahan. That's not what she said. What she said is that Legal Aid Foundation helps voucher tenants, that it's the city attorney's office that is not able to help voucher or Santa Monica Housing Authority program participants because they represent the city. So there is a conflict there with the Housing Authority and the city attorney's office. However, what I will say is the one thing that voucher or program participants are supposed to have is a grievance procedure, which only exists on paper. So it makes it very problematic. And if you want to, like, someone to inquire about payment standards or to inquire about, not receiving a utility allowance or being denied a reasonable accommodation, there really isn't any way for a program participant to appeal that. And I know, because I've tried many times over the last 8 years, and anytime I've ever asked for an informal review, it gets ignored. And they just finally, after you make a million emails and phone calls within the city, you might get it resolved then. But anyways, I'm not going to take up any more time. I really want the public to be able to
Okay, let's go back to Commissioner Hilton. You had a final question?
This is about what's called our local priority wait list and fair housing. For 26 years, the city has imposed taxes and a zoning requirement to support affordable housing, and until recently, we allowed the nonprofit or market property itself to market the affordable units. There were marketing problems, also a perceived lack of local opportunity. About 10 years ago, we adopted what's called a local priority residence and workforce wait list. Two-part question. Do jurisdictions with local tax and zoning requirements, aren't they supposed to provide some sort of local priority? And as in the case of Santa Monica, if there was too little resident workforce opportunity, for example, for 23, 24 years, could not adoption of what we call it a local priority wait list be a type of affirmatively furthering fair housing? In other words, what do other cities do if they impose a local tax or zoning requirement?
Just from the fair housing perspective, obviously there are a lot of localities that have local residency preferences, live-work preferences. In terms of what FHEO looks at, if that's something we come across, is whether there's some sort of discriminatory effect as a result of implementation of that residency preference. For example, if the community, like Santa Monica, is majority white, and there are surrounding communities and jurisdictions that have larger percentages of people of color, and the local jurisdiction is implementing a residency preference, we sometimes might say that that has a discriminatory effect because surrounding jurisdictions cannot obtain or get priority or preference within that housing authority, and therefore that may have a discriminatory effect based upon race or national origin. So those are the issues that we would look at. Again, I can't comment on specifics in Santa Monica. I'm reluctant to do so, but those are the types of issues at least FHEO looks at when we're confronted with a residency preference. And sometimes the work part actually makes it such that it doesn't have the same discriminatory effect because people who are coming into the city to work might, the demographics might look different there. So sometimes that can somewhat address the issue. Doug, did you want to say something about this?
No, I don't. But I just want to say that it's very late in California. It's even later here in Washington, and so I'm going to have to bow out here, and I think my HUD colleagues have to drop off too, or at least most of them. I just wanted to thank you all very much for making the effort to bring these issues to our attention, and we did receive the email with all the documentation and field office staff, and we will look at that. And as Demetria said, she will send or one of us will send a follow-up email with some resources for you all, contact information and that sort of thing too.
I appreciate that. We have some members of the public who would like to comment. Our question and answer period actually went longer than I anticipated. I appreciate you guys being so willing to talk with us at length. If at least some of you would be able to stay on to complete the listening session with some members of the public, I would greatly appreciate that.
Michelle, I can stay on for another 10 minutes. I can stay on for another 10 minutes. And that's yeah, that's all I've got. I was expecting this to go to 7:30. This is
myself as well. Yeah, we can stay on another 10 minutes. Then we got to drop off.
Okay. So
thanks, Doug. Thank you.
Thank you all. Take care.
Thanks, Doug. Okay, so I'm going to open it up to the public. Are there any public comments?
I have one, Michelle. This is
Please
Deborah.
Go ahead.
Okay. Okay. I am concerned with the level or non-level of transparency within the housing authority insofar as allowing the public to have access to data, as it were, with regards to administering the voucher program. In other words, we keep hearing, well, if you don't have any facts and figures with which to present your complaint on, it kind of makes it a moot point if you really have no legal standing or otherwise with which to gain access to that data in order to be able to present it in such a way that any governing authority would be able to go, yeah, that isn't right, or it's not legal. Do we have any sort of a program or system or code set up beginning at the federal level, if not the state, where we can actually say, yeah, this is not only being efficiently handled, but it's not being effectively handled, and there's no transparency with which to be able to lodge a logical complaint.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lynch. I appreciate your comment.
This is Michael Lewis. I have a comment.
Please go ahead.
Good evening, Housing Commission, special guest speakers, including Secretary McCain, if you're watching this recording later. Perhaps our distinguished guest speakers who have been so generous with their time and to stick with us, who remain in the meeting, can pass on the gist of this public comment to Secretary McCain and ask her to listen to it along with some of the other public comments. First, I want to thank all of our special guests for attending this meeting tonight. It really means more to us than you possibly can know, and a big thanks to the Housing Commission for inviting them. You are all answering the call of clients of the Santa Monica Housing Authority to convene and discuss extremely important and urgent issues routinely and historically. These issues have been unaddressed, ignored, covered up, or whitewashed. And in recent years, it has gotten worse. Secretary McCain, again, hopefully if you're watching this recording, we advocates are appealing directly to you, an activist, advocate, an expert in fair housing and housing rights, and a lawyer who has worked tirelessly for these underserved and marginalized populations to get federal HUD to intervene with our local housing authority. The Santa Monica Housing Authority, through negligence, apparently both intentional and unintentional, mismanagement, ineptitude, and what would clearly be considered professional misconduct, is mistreating and outright abusing clients, and they have unnecessarily made people homeless. Housing authority clients are suffering unnecessarily. Their health has unnecessarily worsened. Injuries have been sustained unnecessarily, and most unfortunately, in some cases, people have even died. Disability discrimination is standard operating procedure at the Housing Authority. The organization has cratered now with only 5 staff members. None of them are in management positions, and they are missing at least 7 additional staff members that are required in order for them to function minimally. The Housing Authority has routinely managed to put information on paper in official reports and elsewhere that make them look acceptable to HUD from the very far distance without any follow-up scrutiny. Due to this emergency situation, we advocates and activists and federally subsidized housing clients are begging the federal office of HUD to conduct an audit of the Santa Monica Housing Authority. It is imperative that HUD audit them financially, programmatically, operationally, and by looking at it through a fair housing lens or perspective. We advocates know that 4 of the main reasons clients do not speak out or speak out effectively are, number 1, fear of reprisal or retaliation from the Housing Commission. 2, lack of access due to their disabilities. 3, the Housing Authority and other city bodies are extraordinarily efficient in suppressing public participation and lodging of formal grievances. And number 5, fear of public knowledge that they are on government assistance. These, we can all admit, are huge obstacles. But understand that but for these obstacles, I am absolutely certain hundreds of clients would be present at this meeting tonight, airing credible grievances. We ask for your help. and would like to express our extraordinary gratitude in advance for any way you can assist us. And thank you all for considering my public input.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lewis. Are there any other public comments?
Yes, Denise Barton. Good evening. I'd like to begin with some points from the 2020 Santa Monica Fair Housing Assessment, showing there is no fair housing, especially for the disabled, including a lack of local public fair housing enforcement, a lack of resources for fair housing agencies and organizations, a lack of state and local fair housing laws, no quality of affordable housing information programs, having regulatory barriers to providing housing and supportive services for persons with disabilities, having state or local laws, policies, or practices that discourage individuals with disabilities from living in apartments, family homes, supportive housing, and other integrated settings. Then, so you can see that these policies persist and are not addressed or rectified, you can reference the 2021 to 2029 Santa Monica Housing Element, which was recently approved by the state of California, which under goals number 7 you will find on the first page fair housing issues that may arise in Santa Monica or any jurisdiction, include but are not limited to failure to make reasonable accommodation modifications to make dwelling units accessible to an individual with disabilities, as well as discrimination and harassment of protected classes. I myself, as a disabled person with multiple disabilities, have been a victim to all these practices, as well as feel the city housing authority staff, the executive director and housing authority board have used my disabilities against me, including two stress-related disabilities, practically to the point of abuse, such as the planning department of the city's actions that only negatively affect housing choice voucher units, to the point of disparate treatment in my building, the unit my building is in, including the bright, improperly shielded light on the roof left on all night long, and the raising of the building blocking the airflow, both not compliant with municipal code, not to mention the more recent partition blocking direct airflow to only my unit. Subpar if you can get any assistance from the housing authority staff, slumlord building management, moldy conditions, continued putting unidentified white powder into the common areas of the building, horrific accounting practices, and charging me for the building's electricity use, to name a few. Finally, if disabled services and an ADA person are non-existent in Santa Monica, except for employees, is the city receiving funding for these services? Then where is that money going? Or would the money be anything like the at least $7 million the Social Services Department is unable to account for homeless services, and as an example of this happening in other city departments? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms.
Yes,
Barton.
my name is
Housing
David
Commission,
Morris.
I need to make a quick correction. I said one of my.
Mr. Lewis, did you want to
Hello?
make a correction?
Yes.
Mr. Lewis and then Mr. Morris. Go ahead, Mr. Lewis.
Okay, my name is David Morris. I want to speak to the officials from HUD and thank them.
I'm sorry. I need to
I'm
make
sorry.
a correction.
David, could you hold on just a second? Mr.
Yeah, I'm sorry
Lewis,
that
do you want to go ahead?
the mute toggle kept going back and forth. I made a mistake, an error in one of my obstacles to people speaking out. I said fear of reprisal or retaliation from the Housing Commission. I meant, of course, the Housing Authority. So I just wanted to issue that people do not fear this Housing Commission. They may have feared past Housing Commissions, not this one. So please correct the record. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
Not at all. Thank you for the clarification, Mr. Lewis. Mr. Morris, go ahead.
Thank you, officials from HUD, for sticking out a few minutes longer to hear my public comment and the public comment of the people that actually wish mostly to speak to you. The voucher payment standard, which has not been raised for 6 years now in Santa Monica, I don't think has even been applied for. It's good news that the amount of money is raised from 80% to 92%, according to your figures. But what does that mean to the Santa Monica residents and new vouchers coming this way? The thing that we need most in this city is an actual HUD audit of the housing authority. The complaints voiced tonight and the views voiced tonight are real views and real complaints from real clients and real Section 8 voucher holders. Also from the Housing Commission of the city. I hope you take this seriously. A fiscal audit of the housing authority, I'm sure, would get things back on track. Concerns of civil rights violations, including ADA negligence violations, not even caring to have an ADA coordinator in their staff, as well as regarding the handicapped ADA units, which are unavailable in Santa Monica, which need to be available to people with disabilities. There needs to be a program audit. The programs here are definitely insufficient. The staffing is insufficient. And you seem to have blessed Santa Monica Housing Authority with your approvals and even saying that they have a RAB in place, which is not true. The only time that they decided to discuss a RAB was when advocates demanded that it be created 3 years ago. So they created a backdoor RAB. HUD is blessing this. This is the federal government. We can't be blessing corruption in the back room. HUD needs to address operations at the Santa Monica Housing Authority and see what's really going on so that they can assist this housing authority to be a better housing authority and address the needs of the residents of this city. The staff vacancies, 5 out of 11, is inexcusable for a year. No housing manager, no assistant manager in place. This is also inexcusable for 2.5 years. I'm concerned that the local office has stated to Jim Kemper that Santa Monica is actually doing well and above other housing authorities. I don't see how you can put your blessing on someone that's failing. It's been difficult for clients to exercise their rights to utilize SMR programs and other affordable HUD programs. One of the issues that need to be brought to attention to the housing authority here is to make available information about programs that are available to clients here. If you do not let the general public know what their rights are and what they are available, what programs are available to them, then they will not be able to exercise their rights or to utilize those programs. I feel there's a great need for training for the Santa Monica Housing Authority employees and management so they can assist clients in utilizing all available programs. Thank you for your time, HUD representatives.
Thank you, Mr. Morris. Mr. O'Brien, did you want to comment?
I just wanted to say, this is Mina, and I think Ken's about to wanted to say the same thing. Yeah, I think we've heard the messaging, and I think we will definitely take this back and continue to work with the PJ, and if we need to look for TA and other reviews, we will do so. So thank you all for having us join. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mina. I really appreciate that. And Ken, thank you all very much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, and I put a link in the chat on filing a fair housing complaint with HUD, but we will be following up with a resource list as well. So I wanted
Fantastic. Thank you all so much.
Make sure everybody. Okay, take care, everybody. Be well.
You too. Thank you. We will continue to take public comment on this item. Mr. O'Brien, did you want to make a comment?
Well, I sent things in for the agenda, but at this late hour, I don't think people want to go through the history and all the terrors that have been going on here at 3356. All the documentation speaks for itself. We've had a real battle, struggle for years here with the management, and I mean everything from misusing eviction notices for bad things like having a cable guy on the roof, et cetera, tearing up waiting lists. Nobody knows what the waiting list is in this house. 2, as it is said in the grapevine, selling apartments here. This is a project-based building at 3356 Barnard Way, and our owner on site is being, the word is she's selling parking spaces and apartments. And the worst thing about all this is we have written everyone from the local, the state, and the federal level. We have written the inspector generals. We even sent a registered mail package on April 27th, 2021 to the new Secretary of HUD, Ms. Fudge. Oh yes, and let us not forget our good Congressman, Ted Lieu. We have never got even a polite blow-off letter when all we're asking is, hey, these are our concerns. We suspect misuse of taxpayers' money. Please audit these people. And I agree with Mr. Lewis. They should be auditing Santa Monica's HUD outfit over there, who I tried to work with through Andy Engel. Anyways, folks, the documents speak for themselves. I just wish somebody would pay attention because remember, every time we sign a damn lease, there's a clause in there that says, hey, if you know of abuse, harassment, fraud, let us know. We've been doing that since at least 2016. Okay? Nobody has ever so much as picked up the phone or written us a letter, said, we'll be in touch. We're going to look into this. And like I said, all we've ever asked for is an audit. And if we're wrong, the Tenants Association at 3356 Barnard Way will stand corrected and make appropriate apologies. We don't think that's going to happen. There you go, folks. I tried to be short and quick and to the point.
Thank you very much, Mr. O'Brien. Next, we'll take comments from Shannon Yoshikawa and then Danielle Charney. Ms. Yoshikawa, did you want to comment? Danielle Charney.
This is Shannon. Can you hear me?
Oh, Shannon, please go ahead. Yes.
Yeah, it's been my experience when I was going through homelessness that my complaints were not taken seriously, and the housing authority tends to investigate themselves.
Right.
That's a huge problem, and I think it should be corrected. And
I'm sorry, you seem to have broken up. We'll go ahead to Danielle Charney and we'll come back to, we will come back to Ms. Yoshikawa back in. So Danielle Charney and then Jill, you can speak after her.
I would very much, I don't really have a huge beef personally with the Housing Authority at the moment because they worked pretty hard for me last time, and it was really my landlord who was allowed to just walk all over everybody, myself, the owner, the Housing Authority, Denise McGrath, everybody. He just walked on everybody with his games because he didn't get his money. But in the past, I went through pure hell at the hands of our last manager, who really, I believe, discriminated, committed civil rights offenses, and out forced certain women, senior women, to lose their vouchers by denying them any units unless they were absolute garbage hanging over the freeway or shoving them into where you go to die old age homes. She was literally caused me tremendous illness, tremendous stress, tremendous anxiety, and the inability to use a voucher after I had waited from 2006 to 2014 for it. She did everything she could to be destructive to me and cause me to be homeless. The city did nothing about it. I went everywhere. I went to every council person, to Gary, to Denise, to everywhere, and there was nowhere to go. Eagle could have cared less. Nobody cared one bit what that housing authority did to anybody. And I believe that that period of time, when she came in here in 2008 until the glorious day she left during COVID, should be investigated as to who got vouchers, who got units, where they got them, how old they were, and all the rest of it, because that woman committed horrendous acts to human beings. I went to the local HUD offices, to Brewer and Skonos. They could have cared less. They did not give a damn what happened to any participant. They only cared that they felt that Santa Monica was using the vouchers that were given to them. That's all they cared about. So other than hiring a private attorney who's willing to take on the city, there's no recourse at all. You can die, you can starve, and that's the end of it. And I believe that that was we're talking about the right to return for what we did to people long ago. I think we have to take a look at what that woman did to countless women, countless seniors, because I helped about 10 of them who went through something quite similar. And it really needs to be overturned and investigated. They really need an investigation. It's got to happen, and in detail. Really serious business went on during that period of time. All things considered, I just think right now they're pretty understaffed, and if they can implement any of all this great stuff that this commission is coming up with, they would be really an operational situation for us. Anyway, I'd like to believe that. I'd like to believe that this commission will have an effect and that things can change here, because they certainly need to. That's it.
Thank you very much, Ms. Charney. I hear you. Jill and then Fred. You're muted, Jill. You have to unmute yourself.
Hello.
Yes, go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, I'm okay. I apologize. I'm a little bit of a novice. I want to thank you, Michelle. You lead a great meeting. I also want to thank Teresa, especially, for helping me out today, and everybody that's involved in giving their time. I know this can be very thankless, and I just want to let you know that I appreciate everyone that's here. My experience has been I've been waiting over a year and a half for a different apartment for reasonable accommodations, based on my reasonable accommodations. The only thing I've ever gotten were the below market value affordable housing availabilities, and I can't afford those. So not to mention one time I did fill out an application or I made an inquiry that I was interested in the apartment, did what I was asked to do, never got the application. Anyway, when I told my case manager, because I wrote the mayor and everything, when I spoke to my case manager at the housing authority, she basically tried to belittle me by saying, well, you already have a place to live. We're trying to house people off the street. And of course I'm for that. And of course that's a priority. However, where do I fit in the mix here? Where do people with reasonable accommodations fit in? And why is it like top secret who the person that takes care of the wait list? I mean, do I need a code or a password or something where I can find out where I stand? And and all in all, and with this, I still am eternally grateful for what I have, but what I do need is help. So I'm all for this. I think we said it was going to be CAB, and I just appreciate everybody on the panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jill. Fred, did you want to comment? Fred, did you want to comment?
Hello.
Fred?
Hello.
Just one moment. Fred, you have your hand raised. Did you want to comment? Okay, let us know if you change your mind. The person who was just speaking, you can go ahead.
Oh, okay. Yes, I'm on the phone.
Great, go ahead. We'd
Can
love
you
to
hear
hear.
me? Okay. All right. Thank you. Hello, everyone. So I have the same echo as everyone else on this call. HUD should be really ashamed of themselves, of how they allowing, these management companies, these property managers, and just, allowing this scrutiny to happen to tenants. I don't think they even give a damn about, all the trauma that we're going through, all the sleepless nights that we're going through. HUD has some of the poorest houses in the country. They have us, just as I'm talking to y'all, a mouse is like peeking in and out of me. And I'm dealing with so much, from like cloudy water, just like the tenants in New York City, HUD, the city of Minneapolis, our mayor, our governor. Nobody is saying anything about these issues and these concerns that's so affected our livelihoods and our children. And so, privacy violations. We have a property manager here who has access to our mail. She even gets mail here. And I reported that to the Attorney General's office. Nothing ever happened. The threat of evictions when we, talk out with our tenants association to the owners and to HUD and to Minnesota Housing, they just, severely retaliate against us. I'm one of the tenant leaders, and I also sit on city and state boards, and I work for the city of Minneapolis, and they just come after me so crazy to where my hair started falling out. And I just hate where I live, but I love my location. I love my neighbors, and I love my community. But HUD should be ashamed of themselves. Like, I would echo what they said as well, as investigating and auditing the Minneapolis HUD office. The people there are not listening to Minneapolis residents. HUD is responsible for monitoring property manager behavior, I believe, and ensuring regulatory compliances are being dealt with and protecting the families. And it's just too much stress that we have to continue to be on these calls, continue to do all of this legwork, and nothing happens. Like, how do we hold them accountable? Who holds HUD accountable? For all this pain and suffering, that we continue to go through. We pay our rent.
Unmute yourself, Chair Gray.
I'm sorry. I didn't realize I was muted. I was having a puppy situation here. Are there any other public comments?
Yes.
Please go ahead, Ms. Zaraska.
Hi, good evening. This is Olga Zaraska. Well, I'm very happy that this meeting took place and we had guests from HUD. I wanted to thank the commission. I don't really know how much I could add. I think what happened a couple of days ago regarding the RAB in Santa Monica maybe could be explored a little bit more here. I wanted to say those people who did not watch the Santa Monica Housing Authority Board meeting that what transpired is for about an hour, the chair of the Housing Authority Board engaged in attempts at further delaying the formation of the RAB. It was painful to watch, but it happened. And another thing that happened earlier that day actually is really embarrassing to talk about, but I decided to say it publicly because I think it's important that everybody knows that there are attempts in the city and the Mayor Himmelrich, who's the chair of the Housing Authority Board, is actively trying to basically engage in union busting tactics. What happened is before the September 13th Housing Authority Board meeting where the RAB was going to be discussed, a national tenant organizing a nonprofit called Tenants Together submitted to the city a letter of support for the formation of the RAB according to the Housing Commission's recommendations. It was a brief letter and it was very supportive. I now have learned that that organization, Tenants Together, which is again a huge national organization, received a very angry phone call immediately from our mayor, Stu Himmerich, again, who's also the chair of the Housing Authority Board. And Ms. Himmerich very angrily engaged in slandering statements about the leadership of this commission, both the chair and the vice chair. I wanted to say this publicly. I think it's a huge problem. I think this needs to be attended to somehow. I don't think we can just let it pass. This is like a union busting tactic. I think it's disgraceful, and it just shows how this city or certain powers that be in the city want to prevent the formation of this RAB. And that's probably one of the reasons why we haven't had the RAB here for decades, even though it's federally mandated. And I heard some defensive comments from the director of the local office of HUD tonight, who conveniently didn't mention that HUD somehow missed for a couple decades. They missed the fact that there was no RAB, and she only mentioned that they helped the housing authority in Santa Monica form the RAB that now exists, which is a sham, as we all know by now. So that's it. Basically, just wanted to add those couple details about the RAB, and we will continue fighting for the RAB. And again, thank you, Santa Monica Commission, and thank you everyone who called in today or who attended, and have a good evening.
Thank you so much, Ms. Zaraska. Are there any other public comments? Still see Fred's hand raised. Fred, did you want to say something? Right. Well, I would like to thank
Hello.
everyone. Oh, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I was talking and my call got dropped.
Go ahead and finish your comment.
Oh, okay. So I just wanted to add that, with all these meetings, will we ever hear any solution? With our concerns and our trauma that a lot of us are dealing with, poor health behind it, because we're dealing with poor housing. Do you ever think that we will have any real solutions? Because HUD is just putting Band-Aids on top of our concerns.
I hear you. I guess all I can say is that I'm heartened by everyone's participation here tonight and the participation that I've seen, and that while the arc of the universe is long, it bends toward justice.
Yeah. This is painful. It's very painful, and I almost give you PTSD to hear some of these stories, and they're identical to mine, and it's very traumatizing. And if nobody believes these stories, they think we have this much time in the day to make up these stories. We can't, and it's very disturbing to know that it's so many people across the country that are dealing with these exact poor housing, substandard living conditions, and I just don't have any more words for it. You can't make this stuff up. So again, I would say that in New York City right now, they're having a water issue. They have cloudy water. For 2 years, my building recently went through that. I had neighbors in my building who had bloody noses, including me and my children. We were waking up with headaches. And we believe that we might also have arsenic in our water, but Minneapolis now is trying to make it seem like Minneapolis has the best water. Do anybody on this call have any resources and for Minneapolis or a website where I can purchase some arsenic kits so I can give them to my neighbors?
I'm sorry, I don't have that information. Vice Chair Marosco, would you like to say something?
If you want to privately send me your email address in the chat, do a private chat, I can send you.
I'm on the phone.
Oh, you're on the phone.
But I'm comfortable with giving you. I'm comfortable with giving you my email.
Well, this is, I appreciate that you're comfortable, caller, but this is being
Oh, okay.
recorded and it'll be published later.
Oh,
So
okay. Okay.
Teresa, since your number is already public, why don't you give our caller your phone number and she can contact you that way? Would that work?
Yeah, I have a resource.
Yeah,
I
that's
have
fine.
resources for you. So my telephone number is
I believe. Wait 1 second. I have a friend that's on the call. I can send her she has my email, and if you're listening, can you put my email in the chat? But if not, I can text her and tell her to put my email in the chat.
privately to, so you go into the chat and you go privately.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Choose Teresa Velasco.
Okay, great. Are there any other public comments? Well, I'd like to thank everyone very, very much for joining us tonight for this unprecedented meeting. Yes, Vice Chair Marosco.
Sure, everyone was unmuted so that they could.
Let me double check.
Or on the phone, they don't know how to unmute themselves.
Yes, everyone is unmuted.
Or if you're on the phone, to unmute yourself, it's star.
Everyone should now be unmuted. Are there any other comments?
I have a comment, please.
Go ahead.
I can't tell you just how heartening and, well, happy isn't the right word, but how wonderful it is to hear that people are working on our behalf. The Housing Commission is addressing these issues, which I can say have also affected me physically, mentally, and emotionally, and feeling completely and totally hopeless and helpless about making any changes or getting any redress. And I just am so thankful and feel so much gratitude for all of your efforts. Everyone who's sharing, the public, I'm so impressed with everyone's heartfelt advocacy of themselves and our population. I'm just so very grateful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Are there any other public comments? Well, I'd like to thank everyone again for joining us this evening. This was an important and unprecedented meeting, and we hope that it's just the first of our expanded interactions with varying levels of HUD to help improve the situation in Santa Monica. I'd like to thank again our guest of honor, HUD Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary Demetria McCain, and our special guests, Douglas Rice, Special Policy Advisor in the Office of Public and Indian Housing, Kenneth Carroll, the Regional Director of the Office of Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity, and Meena Bhavan, Director of Public Housing in the Los Angeles Field Office. And if there are no other public comments, I also wanted to say a special thank you to Agnieszka Bierce, who is helping support us as staff tonight, and our interpreter, Elizabeth, for making this meeting available in Spanish. Thank you both very much. And if there's nothing else,
I have one last comment.
Please go ahead.
You ready?
Yep.
Okay. So this is a letter that I wrote to HUD in several meetings that I've attended across Minneapolis, and I recently did one with Nat, wonderful group. And so this letter is to you, HUD, if you're listening on this call. Tenant problems is what it's called. Residents shouldn't have to live how we do. I believe the success stories that comes from tenants, and I know the tears, the pain, and the chronic stress that residents go through. But some tenants stand in fear of slumlords and building managers and bad management companies. We have to stay on top of keeping bad property owners, bad management companies, and the building managers logged in with city halls. But to do it successfully, we need task forces to keep track of that log. City Hall has to do better for the people. Take the politics out and run for the people. Stop letting these landlords continue to fall through the cracks. I don't think city officials get it or understand us. You don't understand what our real circumstances are. It's very easy to blame the people, the residents. It's not the people's fault that the elevators in these buildings don't work. Most of these properties around the country are not being tracked and taken care of. When residents call city inspectors, tenants are being retaliated against. Who protects us? Whose job is it to protect us? It seems no one's helping us. Everyone just wants to take pictures of our complaints, fill out the complaints, and we hear nothing. With all these new policies in place around the country, who protect them and who watches for these landlords to continue to break them? So what I see is people in office are handing out bad policies, and these bad policies are hurting families and small business owners and our elders in our communities. These bad policy decisions are bad for the people. Stop all this lip service and business as usual and get back to work. And then I have like a bunch of list of stuff that goes on with, why, we're requesting these information. And then my letter goes as far as public housing goes, labor unions are getting rich off of public housing, and there are special labor laws just for public housing contractors nationwide. They are reaping huge profits, and I see politicians are receiving contributions from these contractors and labor unions. So everyone is shaking everybody else's hands, and the people who come out on the bottom is us, the tenants. So I ask you, City Hall and elected officials, are you guys living or surviving? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And if there are no other public comments,
I just want to say I privately inbox you, Ms. Michelle and Teresa, this young lady email and her name. So please do make contact with her. Thank you all for this session. I am a board member of the National Alliance of HUD Tenants. Thank you, as well as the National Low Income Housing Coalition. Thank you so much for this session.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Shalonda. And Shalonda, if you happen to have websites for those two organizations, I would really appreciate it if you would add that to the chat so we can follow
Okay,
up.
sure. I could place that in the chat as long as you don't end it before I could put it in there. I would definitely do that. Two great organizations.
Vice Chair Roscoe, did you want to say something?
I did get the email address. Thank you so much, and I definitely will follow up with her.
Fantastic.
Thank you so
much, Shalonda. Thank you again, everyone.
Thank
Have a fantastic evening. This meeting is hereby adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh.